Welcome to our second session of our summer workshop series for artists. If you are joining us again after our first presentation, welcome back. If not, welcome, and we hope you'll stay with us for the next few presentations. But tonight's presenter is a repeat presenter. Lee Little has presented this workshop before. She is a partner in Hamil Little Law. She's also a board member of the Greater Augusta Arts Council. I don't know which is more important. Lee has over 23 years as an attorney. She is former federal prosecutor for the United States Department of Justice. She is also former general counsel for Augusta University AU Health System and AU Medical Center. Lee is a repeat presenter, as I said. She is presenting legal issues for artists. She will be covering whether or not to incorporate and which form it should take, and also some information on legal protection for artists. We have informed Lee of the questions that were sent in your registrations, as well as the fact that since we did the GAAC Artist Grant, we now have musicians attending these sessions, as well as our visual artists, which has always been a strong component of our workshops. So welcome, Lee Little.
Thank you, Brenda and Max, and thank you all for today. I'm happy to take any questions as we go along. I know you may have questions as we follow along. Got maybe 20 or so slides to talk about corporations, different types of corporations, and then I have some questions that were sent in advance and can address those, as well as your questions that come up in real time. And there's some feature that allows you to ask a question. You can type your question in if you know how to do that, or you can just say my name and I'll try to stop and ask you if you have any questions. And along the way, I'll try to remember to do that too. But we want you to get the most out of this session, and so happy to have an two-way conversation about it. And then also we'd love to know your feedback after talk, to tell us if this was helpful, or if you have another or a legal subject that would be helpful to your business as an artist, because we want to support artists and all that you do in our community. Can you all hear me all right? Brenda?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Good. All right. So this is called to incorporate, not to incorporate. So we'll talk about different types of corporations. And I've got some information that I can share with you. If you're interested in forming a corporation in Georgia, you can even do that yourself. Or if you'd like to examine different types of corporate structures, there's really good information about how to do it. It's always good to get counsel. You do need it, but sometimes you're able to do things by yourself as a business person. That can be helpful as well. So the first slide or substantive piece of information I have is comparing LLC, which is a really corporation, to other corporations that you may have heard before. And so there's a chart that differentiates some pros and cons or benefits of an LLC, limited liability, versus traditional corporation, C Corp or an S Corp. So in an LLC, there's no limit on the number of owners in a business. You can have one, you can have 20. And that can be different depending on what type of corporation you have. So an LLC has that benefit. Also, profits and losses go to the owner's tax returns. That can be a tax benefit. There is easy LLC. You don't have any meeting requirements like you do for a C Corp. And you cannot issue stock in an LLC, so it's an informal style of corporation. And then owners have liability for the business debts. So you can name your company, you can incorporate an LLC, and the company itself can take commitments separate from your personal commitments. So you can separate your individual personal assets, your checking account, et cetera, household checking account, from your business accounts and your business obligations. And that's a really nice distinction to have in an LLC that can sort of give you a professional identity about that. So the comparison is on the right side, corporations and a C or S Corp have different details. They can issue stock. That you can have corporate income splitting to lower tax liability. A C corporation requires double taxation of corporate profits. So it's some sophisticated accounting, more sophisticated than with an LLC that's required. An S Corp does not. You do have to hold annual meetings if you have a C or an S Corp and record minutes from that. And then also shareholders don't have personal liability for business management, but the board of directors and officers may have responsibility. So for nonprofit corporations, you often find that those will be Inc. incorporated. So they could be maybe a C Corp or an S Corp, usually a C Corp, but an individual artist business might be an LLC. That would be really common. Are there any questions about that? Okay, so we'll get into it a bit more and talk more details about it. So other types of business structures besides LLC and C and S Corps are a nonprofit corporation. Those are formed to engage in certain types of work, charitable, educational, religious, etc. And those are not taxed by the federal or state government on profits from activities related to their purpose. So that would not be the type of corporation typically that an artist would form if you want to commercialize your work, but you may be a part of a nonprofit corporation if you want to use work in some way that would give one of these benefits and that would be related to the purpose of the corporation. Also, there are professional corporations. My law firm is a PC. Physician practices are often PCs. Those are for licensed professionals. There are series LLCs where you can separate into cells. An umbrella LLC can have separate cells to partition assets and liabilities of a more complex LLC. And then there's what's called a limited liability partnership, where there can be more than one partner in a company, and the company itself limits the liability of the business decisions of the partners. So all of these structures can remove personal risk from the individuals who run the business, and those are helpful. So in Georgia, and probably in most states, there's a Secretary of State's office that handles incorporation. And Georgia has a really nice website for the Secretary of State that provides information that will describe different types of corporations. So you can read and learn about what might be a good corporation for you to have or a good business structure for you to have. And so I provided some hot links in the material so that you can look at this information and review it to the extent it might be helpful to you. But one of the links has a chart with all the different types of corporations that Georgia can allow you to register set out, and it talks about the details of those and some benefits similar to what I've discussed with you, but it would provide detail about many different types of corporations. One type of business in Georgia is a sole proprietorship, and this would be the kind of business that an owner might have who doesn't want a corporation but does want to have a professional identity for their business. This is a very simple type of business to create, but it can be registered in Georgia. And in this kind of business, your business is inseparable from your personal assets. So that would be one thing to consider about what type of business to choose. Do you need for your personal assets to be separate from your corporation or your company's assets? In a sole proprietorship, the responsibility for finances, loans, and liabilities go to the owner of the business. It is the easiest way to start a business in Georgia. What you would do is choose a business name, file a trade name, and appoint a registered agent to accept legal papers. So if you were sued in the name of the proprietorship, for example, you would want someone identified on the record with the Georgia Secretary of State's office to be able to accept those legal documents. And it doesn't have to be a lawyer, but you do have to have someone named as a registered agent for a business like that. Some reasons that you might consider incorporating. I've talked about some of these things as we've gone along. If you incorporate your business, name it, register it, it defines your business legally and strategically. It gives you a professional identity to protect your brand. It allows a new corporate or a new presence that can be sued or can sue. So it gives a legal identity to your business that's different from yourself personally. It allows you to deduct business-related expenses, and you can prove that to the government that a business expense was related to your company if you have company accounts and you're paying business expenses out of those accounts. So it can cause a separation that's helpful to you from tax perspective and personal financial perspective as well. It also gives you pride of ownership in your business. Many artists start creating works, and of course you've got some ownership under the law about the works that you create independently, copyright ownerships, etc. But if you decide to commercialize your work or you need to protect it legally, then creating an identity that's on the record gives you the pride of ownership that, yes, I've got a business, I've reached a certain level in my career that I want to commercialize, I want to be known, I want people to know my name as an artist. And so the pride of ownership is really a nice intangible benefit that would be a reason to consider forming a corporation. You can incorporate not only in the state where you live and work, as most people do, but you could incorporate in other states, and you may want to consider that depending on where you might sell your work, or if you travel to participate in certain fairs or whatnot, or performance venues, you might want to consider the incorporation laws under the state where you do your work. And some states have laws more favorable to corporations. Delaware is a really common state for businesses to incorporate in, but the Georgia corporation laws, especially around LLC, are favorable and are easy to use. And so, again, most individuals that I know who have incorporated small businesses do incorporate in the state where they live and work. But if you had multiple locations or a reason to locate elsewhere, you might consider doing that. So the meaning of LL and LLC, limited liability, we've talked about a bit already. The members in an LLC are not personally liable to pay the debts and often court judgments of an LLC. So creditors cannot go after the personal assets of members to satisfy a debt or judgment. So you're buffering yourself a bit by forming an LLC from your personal responsibility and your personal finances. But you do have to be careful to run an LLC in the right way to make sure that you stay within the lines of it. There are ways that an LLC owner can be responsible for actions of the LLC or for their own actions in regard to the LLC. So if you personally and directly injure someone in your work for an LLC, you can be responsible for that individually. If you guarantee a bank loan that is the loan of the LLC and the LLC defaults on it, then you personally can be responsible for that because you signed your name personally to guarantee that loan. Same as if you co-signed with anyone else. You can do that for an LLC. If you fail to deposit taxes that are withheld from employee wages, you can become personally liable if you're the owner of an LLC. If you intentionally commit fraud or other illegal conduct, you can be responsible because that goes to your personal actions, you can't buffer it with a corporate liability. And so if also you treat the LLC like an extension of your personal affairs rather than a separate business. So if you open up an LLC checking account and you start paying for your groceries out of it, that's not keeping your business separate and professional. And so if someone sued you personally for conduct of the LLC and you said, no, that's my business, it's separate from my personal affairs, they're not mixed, but you've mixed the work of the LLC by treating it like your personal fund for your personal expenses, that could be a way that you could water down that argument, and the court might say, no, we're not going to keep that separation to protect you from liabilities of the LLC. You're responsible to account for that. Some other ways to treat your LLC like a business: you should invest enough cash in the LLC to pay the expenses and liabilities of the business. So you would establish your LLC, create its identity, name it, register it, get your registration in order with the Secretary of State, create a corporate account in the name of the LLC, and you would pay expenses of the LLC out of that account. And then any commitments that the LLC takes on, you want them to be in writing, you want them to be legal, and the LLC should pay its bills responsibly. So any obligation that the LLC takes on as an owner, you want to see that it meets those obligations to keep it out of trouble. Also, you'd want to get a federal tax ID number for your LLC if you're going to have employees, if you're going to be taxed as well. You want to open a business checking account and don't mix personal finances with LLC finances. Also, it's advisable to create a formal operating agreement, and I'll talk a bit more about the benefits of one of those as we go forward. Those can protect an individual by creating a professional structure about your business, but they can also certainly protect you very well if you have partners or multiple owners in an LLC, because you formally define responsibilities of the LLC in an agreement like that. And it sets forth what are your parameters of the relationship, who's going to do what, who's putting in money, is everybody a money investor partner, or how are you going to treat voting rights, or who gets to call decisions, who gets to decide on employee decisions, who gets to purchase property or make lease obligations, or sell art, or decide every aspect of the business you could decide in an operating agreement. Also, if you can obtain business insurance, that is helpful to protect your business assets from claims and lawsuits. And also, depending on sort of the size of your business and your intentions and the risk that you might have, you want to consider that sort of insurance. So if you had a business where you're going to create public art that may have an element of risk to it, because the public's going to interact with it, let's say it's a sculpture, or maybe you create something that's intended for the public to interact with, perhaps it's a bridge or something that the public is intended to be able to touch and interact with, there could be some risk about it just from having that in a public setting. And so you may need to purchase business insurance, but certainly you would want to work with the city, county, state government, wherever you're installing the art, to make sure that you do have adequate liability protection. That's important for both sides. Also, you want to consult with an experienced accountant to file your tax returns correctly. Here are some details and benefits of operating agreements. We talked about that a bit. This sets clear rules for the operation of your corporation, your LLC. They're good for sole owners as a professional practice and to limit liability. This shows, if you have an operating agreement for your LLC, that it's a professional business separate from your personal identity. Co-owners benefit certainly from the structure of an operating agreement. It structures your financial and also your working relationships, and it causes you to sit down and have a conversation about who's going to do what, who's going to be responsible for what aspects of the business, rather than certain things being assumed. If a court has to determine whether your LLC is real or just created to limit you from personal liability, sort of as a ruse, or to just for that purpose and not really as a robust company, an operating agreement can help you establish it as a real company in a court setting. We talked about establishing percentages of ownership in the LLC. If you've got one investor that's going to put in all the money and the other that might create the art, for example, you want to know up front, is the money owner going to get a greater percentage of ownership in the LLC, or is the artist going to get a greater percentage, or is it going to be 50-50 or some, you want to consider, how's it going to go? How many owners are there? Who gets what and why? Also, you can set the share of profits and losses that are expected for each co-owner. Are you going to be able to call for additional investment in the business if certain things happen? And you can detail all the rights and responsibilities of the co-owners in an operating agreement. Also, you can decide what will happen to the LLC if the co-owner leaves. Maybe you've established a band and you've got several members and you have an operating agreement and one's going to leave. The operating agreement can tell what's going to happen to the ownership of that company if one of the members leaves. If you don't have an operating agreement, then state law governs your business operation through default rules. And so you'd want to find out what rules would govern the operation of your business otherwise if you decide not to have an operating agreement. Here are some items to include in your operating agreement: member percentage interests, member rights and responsibilities, member voting powers, how profits and losses are allocated, how the LLC will be managed, rules for holding meetings and taking votes, details about buying and selling the LLC, individual members leaving by sale of the interest, death, or disability. So some of those things we talked about before. We discussed that you're not required by law to hold an annual meeting, for example, with an LLC and have minutes, but maybe you want to in your company so that you can document what happened and when with your various owners. So those kinds of things are important and they can be set forth in an operating agreement. Here's some details about setting up a Georgia LLC, and there's a link to the this information and more on the LLC or Secretary of State website. You want to pick a name for your LLC. That's an exciting part of it. A lot of people have a name in mind. They might use their own name, or if you're going into business with someone else, you might use the initials of all of you, or you might combine your names in some creative way. Or if you've got a band, obviously you can be really creative and have fun with naming your business. And you can check a site like GoDaddy to reserve a domain name for branding and marketing to make sure that no one else has your name, or the name that you want, or if someone else does, it wouldn't be a name that wouldn't be confused with another business or copyright or trademarked by another business. You want to file articles of organization and transmittal forms with the Secretary of State. You pay your filing fee of $100. You appoint a registered agent to accept legal papers if you're sued. And you can form an LLC, again, as I said, with just one person. You'd want to create an operating agreement to formalize the agreement if there's more than one person in it. And you have to pay a $50 annual registration fee in Georgia between January and April 1 of each year. So you'd want to calendar your responsibility to do that. So next, ending an LLC. Your operating agreement can talk about how you are going to end your LLC. And if you don't, then state law would govern that. And so that would be important for you to know what would happen to your business if one member leaves. Would the business automatically go to the other owners, or do you need to detail in a buy, sell portion of an operating agreement what the company or corporation would do to buy out whatever owners are leaving? And then how would you evaluate the interests of what they own? If it's a company where you're going to have product, is there any ongoing obligation of the business to share profits for the product with owners who are leaving? If you've got a financial investor who invested in the business, do they want to at least break even on their investment before they leave the business? Or do they have some threshold of profit that they require? All these sorts of things should be considered up front and can be detailed in an operating agreement. If it's silent, state law governs, and many states cause automatic dissolution of an LLC, or they make it go away if a member leaves. So that's really important to find out before you have someone leave, what is going to happen if someone does. Also, if an LLC dissolves, the members have to fulfill any remaining business obligations, pay off the LLC debts, divide any assets and profits among themselves, and decide whether to start a new LLC with the remaining members. So those are important considerations, especially if you have more than one member in your LLC.
Lee, I have a question.
Okay.
So if you have an operating agreement that says something different from the state law, would that override, like if the state says that it dissolves if one person leaves, but you have an operating agreement that details like a buyout or whatever, would that override the state law, or does the state law still rule?
As to the state default law about what happens to an LLC, you override it in an operating agreement. You get to say your business goes in that regard. It wouldn't overrule the law in regard to sort of the basics of an LLC, like the tax liability or whatnot. But in terms of how you're going to run the day-to-day business and what happens if somebody leaves, et cetera, you get to call that.
But the drummer leaves, it doesn't mean it dissolves if you have an operating agreement that
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question. So here's some general business tips, and then I'm happy to take questions if there are others about corporations. We had some other questions in general regard to obtaining rights and protecting your artistic work, so I'll answer those as well. So some general business tips about setting up a business are: ask reputable, experienced colleagues who are doing the kind of work you want to do successfully. How do they manage their business? If you see somebody who's doing really well in your field and you want to be like them, you want to ask them, can you recommend a good accountant to help me handle my tax responsibility, or someone to help me incorporate, or a marketplace for my work, those sorts of things. Usually people are happy to share their experiences in that. And it's a great way to network with other artists and also just learn really good tips, best practices to help you manage your business well. It's important to hire professionals when you need them. If you need help to guide your business to avoid a dispute, or if you're going to be drafting an operating agreement, or you have a contract that you need drafted or you want reviewed, it's important to hire someone, spend some money to protect you up front, especially if you're in a business where you're going to have a great deal of risk. Think in advance about what professionals you might need to help you, and that can be a way that your colleagues can help you find good people. And especially if you're in either an area of high risk, or if your company is making a good amount of money, then you want to protect your assets as best possible. So hire professionals when you need them. Also, you want to use available resources to set up and manage your business, like the Secretary of State information. I'm familiar with many small businesses who have done their own incorporations. It's a ministerial type process, so that piece of it certainly can be done by you as an individual. and with help from the Secretary of State. They're also really helpful at the Secretary of State's office to share information with you, to help you sort of get going and even, potentially choose the type of business that you may have. Looks like we have a question here. Let me take a look at that. So the question is, have you seen artists or other small businesses use a statutory closure corporation? I have not. I have not been experienced with that. If the individual asking the question would like to talk either offline about it, or if you'd like to talk to the group about it, to talk about your experience with it, we'd be happy to hear about it. Also, any of you that would like to follow up with me about a question that we didn't cover, or if you would like more information, or I could help you with a referral to an accountant or to another colleague, I'm happy to do that. Also, some other tips generally in business: when you do business with others, you want to put your agreement in writing so that the expectations and obligations are clear and provable. So this is really important, especially if you're going in an area of risk, or you're going to commercialize your work, or you're going before an audience, and you're sort of getting more awareness to your art, or you've got an agreement that's going to put commitments on you. You're going to be paid for your art. You want to establish what are the rights and obligations going forward. You're going to have a copyright in the original works that you create. However, to be able to protect that, you would actually need to register the copyright so that other people know that you created it. And so if you're going to create art, visual art, for example, you want to have an agreement in writing with whoever you're creating the visual art for, that protect your copyright in the work, but allow them to use it, whoever's purchasing it, in the way that they need to be able to use it. And so having a written agreement is really important around that. And also around your expectations about payment. If you're going to be producing a work in phases, you may need to get a portion of the payment up front, a portion along at a certain deliverable objective, and then a portion of it at the end. So those are important things to put in writing. So you want to set clear expectations for yourself and others and fulfill the commitments that you make. So those are just some general business tips to keep you protected. If there are other questions, happy to take those now. Otherwise, I can take a look at the questions that I have received from the group in advance and talk about a response to those.
Lee, this is Pax. I actually have a couple of questions. I've seen local artists and other artists have their business name where they are listed with the comma Inc. sometimes and comma LLC. Is that just when they're naming themselves, they've decided to do that, or is that clearly indicating that they are a C corporation, S corporation, or LLC? Or
right. I believe Inc. should be used for a different type of corporation than an LLC, and that you should use LLC when it is an LLC. For a law firm or professional corporation, we use PC. And so if you're going to identify it as Inc., it should be the kind of go along with the kind of corporation you are identifying. So if it's an LLC, you should call it an LLC. Got it.
Okay. And then one other question I had was, you mentioned series LLCs.
Right.
I'm just trying to think practically for who in the arts community might really benefit from having a series LLC. If you're doing a lot of different partnerships, do series LLCs, can you have different partners in each sub one and you're the umbrella because you're like if you're in a couple of bands, or you have a few businesses with different people, or would you just have separate LLCs for each of those?
You can have an umbrella LLC with multiple businesses under it, and you can register DBA names, doing business as. You could have multiple DBA names under it. However, to best protect the assets of each individual LLC or business, it's better to have separate LLCs. And so if you do have an umbrella, it's possible that the umbrella LLC group is going to be held responsible, and all of the assets of all of the members of the LLC, the sub aspects, could be responsible. The responsibility could go up to the umbrella organization. So it's you want to structure whatever you're going to create in a way that best protects you from liability and best protects your assets from liability. And also, you want to protect your brand identity. And so if you do have an umbrella LLC, but you want to have sub LLCs, sub businesses under that, you want to think about how to continue to identify and separate the businesses that are under it. If you're in a similar line of work, I could see the benefit of an umbrella more so than having separate types of work. Like if your objectives are completely different, then you want to think about, would it be good to separate the risk of one type of business from the other by keeping separate LLCs?
So in a series LLC, they're all legally interconnected. There's really not separation. It's just, I guess I don't really understand what a series LLC is for.
Well, there is a distinction that gives you some separation, but you need to create your documents correctly to protect yourself against risk. Okay. But I do think that if your purposes are so different and separate and your brands are so different and separate, each business is gonna have different roles to play. And so you'd want to consider whether it would be better to combine them in an LLC based on the needs of the business or to keep them separate. It's not expensive to create separate LLCs. And if you've talked about having different management structures in the sub LLCs, I need to know more about the rationale, I think, for forming the umbrella organization. So those are the kinds of things to think about and talk about when you're forming one. You know, what's going to be the best protection? What does the business need to do? You know, why do you want the umbrella organization? Like, what are the objectives of the umbrella organization versus the individual components?
It's in just personal experience with a number of local artists, plus through responses to surveys that we've had. We know that there are local artists who really, like, they're musicians in a band and they're visual artists, and they have like separate things. So I'm just trying to consider it from that perspective.
Right. So one individual who's an artist but does multiple things might have an umbrella LLC and separate DBAs, like here's my artist work, here's my band work. I could see that. And there may not be great risk to that individual of a lawsuit, someone getting injured, somebody suing them, right? Like somebody paints and they also play in a band. Why not have one company that is the LLC and could do business? You know, you could do business under that one umbrella, right? Because your risk is going to be low. Yeah. Okay, so other questions that we had before the talk. How do you legally protect your artwork? So we've talked about that a bit as we've gone along. Legally, there's copyright law that protects your work when you create original work, whether it be music or visual art. But to let other people know, to let the world know that you've got right, you have to register it. And that can be done, you can do that yourself. There's a copyright.gov website. You can go and you can apply for copyright on photographs, on visual art, certainly on music. And the fee, I think, is in the range of $50 to $60 to register up to 10 works of art and up to 750 photographs. And then it just takes a few months of waiting to get the application examined and get back the copyright. And some of you who are on this broadcast have had good experience, I'm sure, in copywriting your works and may want to talk more about that. But in order to be able to say, hey, that's mine, and sue somebody about copying your work or using it or reproducing it, it is good to protect yourself through a copyright. And if you're a musician and you've created an original song and you don't want someone else to perform it, you know, the copyright's going to enable you to cut people out of being able to use or reproduce or copy your work and without your permission. And so you can grant licenses, copyright licenses, but only if you've got the copyright registration. When a government entity or other private entity purchases a work like a mural, they can purchase certain rights to be able to, they own the work in some regard, but they don't necessarily own all aspects of copyright to the work because the artist can own those. So you could have a copyright license assignment where the artist assigns their rights to the purchaser of the work. And you'd want a legal agreement about it depending on the value of the work and the cost of it. Depending on what the end user wants to do and what the artist wants to be able to do, what rights do they want to preserve in their work? So those are some things to think about if you are creating original works. One question is, are there folks who represent artists? So I do know, I don't know of an entertainment firm or agency that's based in Augusta, I think. In terms of legal disputes, contracts, etc., our firm has represented artists. We have an artist painter we represented who was in a dispute with an art dealer who was receiving commission from the artwork, and they had a dispute about whether the accounting and payments were proper. And so that was an example of a legal dispute where our firm, a law firm, represented an artist, but I don't know of a bona fide dedicated law firm that does just entertainment law in Augusta. Certainly there are many firms in Atlanta who do that type of work on a regular basis.
Lee, I think that Sincere Stallings, who just joined our board this year, I believe she's listed as an entertainment lawyer.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So we do, and I'll share that information when we send out the video from this. I'll check with her before, but we can send her her name and contact information out to this group.
Well, that's exciting. You may want to have a follow-up talk.
Yeah. So I was hoping that, if questions came up like that we could ask Cece if she'd be interested in doing that.
Very good. Okay, good. It's wonderful to have the need for that in Augusta. And in Georgia, we've developed so much, and certainly the film industry, but in our arts format generally, and Augusta is continuing to grow in that and have more need around it. So it's really important that we have support for artists in that regard, in business and legal aspects. Another question we had, is an LLC a good direction for an artist or an art teacher? So I think yes, if the artist or art teacher needs the protection and the business identity that an LLC could provide. So if an artist is going to be selling their work and making a fair amount of income, and there's a need to separate their corporate identity from their personal identity and risk, then it could be good to have an LLC. If you're just sort of starting small and you want to just receive a certain amount of income from a product that you might create and sell, sort of testing the waters, it may not be time for you to set up an LLC. You may just want to sort of keep it separate for you to know, how are you doing expense and income wise from the business. But, if you start to generate significant income from it, then you do want to think about, what's good for you from a tax perspective and from a business perspective to protect your business. And considering incorporation can be a good way to go at that point. An art teacher, that, if you're going to be paid by a company or a government business, you'll probably have an arrangement or agreement, and that might be separate from a corporation. So I don't know that an employed art teacher whose job is to create art for an organization would necessarily need an LLC or a corporation. It really goes more to commercializing art, or if you were an art teacher who's going to work on contract for different organizations, you would certainly want to have a contract with those organizations to hire and pay you to do it. But you might want to consider creating an LLC to define your business about that. And again, to me, it would go to professional identity and also to tax responsibility for the income about the business. But those are to think about and consider.
I think Larry Millard has a question.
Okay, great.
You need to unmute yourself, Larry.
Yes. It seems, I didn't ask that question, but it seems that that was the kind of person who might be teaching art classes out of their house or out of a facility, and that they were sort of seeking liability in case someone came there and fell and injured themselves or something like that. I have a feeling that was the nature of the question, not so much they were employed by an institution.
Well, that could be helpful to consult with your insurance company about your homeowner's insurance and what it would cover. If you have a home business like that, you know, there might be insurance that you could obtain that would protect you. And whether you have a business or not, you know, you would want to be able to be insured about it if somebody might get hurt on your property. So that's a good question. And if that is the perspective that they're taking to like a liability type protection, then yes, it would be helpful and important to have an LLC, or might be helpful and important to have an LLC, but it certainly would be important to have good insurance about injury, I think, as well. Some other questions have been around copyright. I think we've covered a fair bit of information around copyright. We talked about registration to protect from suit, to restrict the use of others to use your work. And so really, I believe we've covered the material, and I think that we've covered the questions that were given in advance. So did you have another question or comment, Larry?
Yes, regarding the copyright, you said that it takes a while for you to get a return from that. What kind, is there a statute of limitations? Let's say I created something in 2015. May I file a copyright for that now, or does it have to be in a timely manner within a certain period of time of the creation of the work?
I would have to research that, but I believe you can register it when you like. The copyright attaches when you create it, and when there's certain details about that, if you display, if you perform, etc. For music, a copyright attaches when it's written, you know, when a score is written and it's documented that it's written, or when it can be when it's performed. But to register it, I don't know of an upfront deadline where they'll say, no, you're too late to register it. I would think that you can register it when you want to if you're the first one to do it. So, I mean, that's really what you're doing, is taking a chance, if you don't register it, on your ability to enforce the copyright, that nobody else can copy it and then she can prove you created it. I think especially in music, or created an artwork that you didn't want produced, that you would want to hurry up and register.
Would that
number of consumers that are going to see your work, and the greater chance for competition or copy that you would have would give you a greater interest to want to copyright it sooner rather than later.
So that copyright would be effective in 2020 as opposed to 2015.
Copyright registration.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
That's a nice thing to know.
Yeah, I mean, the legal dispute, you won't really flesh out that issue, right? Or late to sue somebody about registered it later. That would be an interesting legal issue.
Right. Well, in theory, things are protected if you put C, you know, with inside of a circle and your name and a date, theoretically. But that's theoretical.
Well, if you want to sue somebody about it or say, hey, that's mine, then you should register.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I actually want to stop sharing so we can be looking at each other more. Here we go. Hello, everybody. So are there any more questions for Lee? Lee, I think that means you did an excellent job.
Oh, great. Thank you. Or either everybody's asleep.
You've answered all our questions. So during our presentation, I heard a number of times to check with your accountant and to check on your insurance. And so we do have 2 more workshops scheduled. One will cover insurance for Artists. Preston Moss will be here from Blanchard and Calhoun to talk about insurance issues. And our last scheduled workshop in September is with Debbie Banks with Ocozzio Advisors. She's a CPA, and we'll talk about accounting and paying taxes, which we have met some artists who didn't know they had to do that. No one here, I'm sure. And then we'll continue on. So if you have more workshops, we talked about an entertainment lawyer bringing back in for more specific questions. If there are other workshops that you'd like, Pax and I are interested in hearing your thoughts. I did not introduce Pax when I came in, and she was hidden behind our screen share. Pax Bobrow is our projects manager for the Greater Augusta Arts Council, and she also handles all of our public art, which has become a very big job. So thank you, Pax, for doing that. And so no more questions. We do have, I feel like we have to end at 6. Pax has a question.
I just wanted to mention there were a lot of questions that were posed about copyright law, and Americans for the Arts actually has an ongoing webinar series like ours, but on a national scale, that was before the pandemic, and on their website from January of this year, there is actually they call them the coffee chats, and they actually had a session on copyright law for artists in January. So if you're not a member of Americans for the Arts, you should be, because they are our National Arts Council, and their resources, it's sometimes a little like drinking from a fire hose, but they do actually have a recording of that session that speaks specifically to copyright law. So since there was so much interest in that, I just wanted to, if you go Google Americans for the Arts and you look up their past webinars and their coffee chats from January, you'll find it. So,
right, that's great. So since I feel like we do have 1 more minute and we have a smallish group, so would you each, for I think for Lee's sake mainly, introduce yourselves and talk about what you practice, and we'll start with Rick.
Admirer of the arts, and just wanted to, I'm currently looking for my next adventure, and definitely wanted to invest a little time also back into the arts. So just trying to figure out how else I can get invested into the arts. So
Well, welcome, and we're glad you're
Thank
here
you.
and chose us to jump in with. Larry. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Larry Millard, sculptor, taught at the University of Georgia, was on the Greater Augusta Arts Council board. I've lived in Augusta for 5 years. I was a trailing spouse for my wife, Cheryl Goldslager, who was the Morris Eminent Scholar of Art and had a show that just came down from the Morris Museum. And so we spent 5 years in Augusta, and then we've moved back completely to Athens, and our house is a warehouse. It's amazing. Oh. The junk we have collected while we were there and here.
Right. Dennis Skelly.
I'm Dennis Skelly. I've been on the Greater Augusta Arts Council board for a number of years and had the privilege of serving in many capacities and really enjoy it. Have learned a ton. I have a health career background and recently have chosen to endeavor in the world of art and have created a few outdoor sculptures as well as other works of art. And so this is a new chapter in my life. So having seminars like this are very helpful, answers a lot of questions.
Dennis. Art, the artist.
Hi, my name is Art the Artist, Abden, and I have Art the Artist Studios. I'm a retired military. I'm a graphic artist, live painter, and art educator with Jesse Norman School of the Arts and a few other schools.
Thank you, Art. Matt.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good, it's working. Well, I'm a musician here in Augusta, and I have been in Augusta, I guess it's about 7 years, originally from Pennsylvania. And after something of a professional lifetime in the advertising industry, with the move down here, I was a stay-at-home dad primarily for most of that time. And since my son is in high school, and it's allowed me a lot more time to kind of reevaluate the music career that was always on the side and the weekends. And I've been able to concentrate and get a lot more active and keep busy here down in the Southeast. And I appreciate the lecture today, and the whole series is interesting. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for being one of our regulars.
Thank
Jamie
you.
J. Oh, the boss is here.
We're in the middle of baby hour. My name's Jamie Jackson. I do some creative freelancing. I do some writing and some marketing. So Lee, I really appreciate all of the advice on LLC and forming an LLC, and Max just works really hard at being a baby. So that's us. Yeah.
Well, we'll send you the bill for bringing a second attendee. I think
Okay,
that's a little
my free
too
bill.
many.
Yes, please do.
All right, that's everyone. I don't see that. I have more. Larry has a question. You have to unmute.
Actually, a comment, and I wrote it in, and that is I attended this about 2 years ago, and it was fantastic. I had meant 30 years ago to start an LLC and never did not understand how easy it was, because at the time, a friend of mine who owns a company said, oh, for about $500, you can get an attorney to set it up for you. And so I just went, okay, I'm not going to do that now. And that was, 30 years ago. So $500 was a different amount back then. But anyway, with Lee's guidance, her talk, her help, her nudging, I did that, set up a bank account, which was free of charge. That's separate. I did all the things that she recommended. And I don't know that I'm any better off, but I certainly mentally feel better off. And that's part, the peace of mind that it created is what is so very important. And she's such a great person anyway. And just the compassion that she talks about this is wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I'm glad that you mentioned your LLC because I wanted to know how it was going.
Yeah, it's great. And the insurance, I have a great insurance policy that's separate for that. And so I've got everything encapsulated that hopefully I'm protected should someone, as I say, I'm idiot proofing my sculpture is what I'm trying to do.
Art, did you have a question? Or were you clapping hands? I never know what the difference is. You were clapping hands. Okay. I have a hard time with that. So I'll tell you, and Larry, I don't want to scare the pants off you, but I just visited the most recent sculpture that was installed in town, the one at Beacon Station, done by Wesley and Matt. And I'm telling you in advance what I'm going to write up for my art adventure this week, but hopefully none of you are going to steal my story. So we were trying to shoot from the roof, shoot photos from the roof, and the maintenance man wouldn't let us go on the roof. You had to kind of crawl up a ladder to get to the roof. But then he went to do a repair underneath a woman's sink who lived on the 4th floor overlooking the statue. So we had taken pictures from the 1st floor, and then we went up the 4th floor. And she said, I really want to climb that sculpture. And I went, oh no, please do not climb that sculpture. But that's why you want insurance, because people who live on the 4th floor who have a little athletic body, they really want to climb that sculpture. I said, now you have a pet monkey. You can let the monkey climb, but you're not allowed to. So it's kind of scary.
Wow.
Yeah. Because people want to climb it, and we don't want them to. All right. Thank you all very much. Any final questions or comments for Lee? If you do have suggestions for ongoing workshops, please send them to me or to PAX, and we'll get those set up. We have a few more that we'll be working on, but we really want to hear it from the people who are attending these workshops, what you'd like to hear. So I have someone coming in to say goodbye. So thank you all very much, and hopefully we'll see you at in their insurance presentation in a few weeks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Lee.
You're going to say hail and farewell.
Yeah, great job, Lee. Thank you.
Great job. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
I'm ending.